So Romans chapter 13 obviously comes after Romans chapter 12, which comes after Romans chapter 11 and 10 and so forth. And you get the idea. I can count from 13 backwards. But in chapter 12, it told us that we need to love without hypocrisy. You may recall that. And then in light of that love without hypocrisy, chapter 13 comes right along, and it's going to give us a couple of things. One is going to tell us that the first section is going to tell us in how we relate to our government. And it really doesn't matter what culture, what country you live in, everybody has a complaint against government. Somebody doesn't do things right, something that you don't like, your tax money being wasted or spent in a way that you don't appreciate, and all those sorts of things. And Paul's not addressing whether or not we have perfect government, but he's going to address our response to the Lord. And then the last section of Romans chapter 13, verses 8 through 14, talks about how we're to deal with one another in light of all that God has done. Remember Romans chapter 12, the multiple or many mercies of God, that he would forgive us, that we might have a relationship with this almighty God. That because of these things, because of all that God has done for us, then how are we to love? Romans chapter 12 told us to love without hypocrisy. And then in chapter 13 here, it's going to tell us how we're to deal with one another, how we're to respond to each other. So again, in Romans chapter 13, beginning in verse 1, let every soul be subject to the governing authorities, for there is no authority except from God, and the authorities that exist are appointed by God. Now, this can be a difficult verse. It's straightforward. There's nothing difficult in the sense of how to explain it. It's just difficult in the sense of how to live it out. Let every soul, that includes Christians as well as non-Christians, every person that lives on the face of the earth, they are to do what? They are to be subject. In other words, you're to be willingly submitted to the governing authorities. And almost immediately, every one of us can think of some incident when governing authorities did something wrong or something that's unfair or intrusive. And I get all of that. But Paul, remember, Paul was writing this when? When was he writing this? He was writing this when the Roman government was in charge. Now, the Roman government was not a friend to Christians. The Roman government was authoritarian. They did collect taxes, but they didn't care whether you liked it or not. The Roman government ruled by the edge of the sword. They threw people into prison. If you weren't a Roman citizen, if you were just suspicious, you could be thrown into prison, you could be beaten, their form of interrogation was to beat you until you confessed. And it's in spite of all of this, Caesar Nero, one of the worst Caesars or the worst emperors of Rome, was in charge during Paul's writing of this letter. Nero's the one that took Christians, lit them on fire so they could be torches in the middle of his garden. And yet he says, submit to the Roman government, or government in general, government authorities. In Jesus' time, Pontius Pilate, who was probably one of the worst governors over the area of Judea, was the governor. And Jesus submitted to him. So every soul must be subject to the governing authorities. Why? Because the governing authorities are right or pure or they do everything right? Absolutely not. Why? Because there is no authority except from God. That police officer, that governor, that mayor, that president, that congressman, in our case, gets their authority from where? From God. The authorities that exist are appointed by God. And I know that's sometimes difficult for us to swallow if you don't like whoever happens to be in charge. Whatever their political viewpoint might be, if it's somebody that you don't like, and I get that, there's lots of people in government that I don't like their political viewpoints, but they're in that place because God put them there. Now, wait a minute. How can a God of love and justice put in somebody or allow somebody to be put in who is horrible? And the reason is that there are times that God allows unruly, ungodly individuals into positions of authority for his purposes. Sometimes it's even to set a nation up for his coming judgment. Now, that's a difficult pill to swallow, but what we're saying is that God is in absolute control. Does this justify the abuse of governmental power? No, it doesn't. Does it justify a police officer doing whatever he or she thinks? No. But the position or the office is appointed by God. And so we are to be in submission to them like we are in submission to God the Father. Likewise, verse 2, furthermore, whoever resists the authority resists the ordinances of God, and those who resist will bring judgment on themselves. So when we resist or we fight against government, we're really fighting against God. What we ought to be doing is praying. We need to be praying for our governmental authorities. Those that are godly or those that you agree with their positions, that they would follow through with what they promised you, which is always a concern for us in our nation. Politicians can promise one thing, and it really doesn't matter the spectrum, whether they're right or left, Democrat or Republican, or national leaders or local leaders. Everybody makes promises, but not everybody follows through with them, and I get that. In our form of government, in our democracy, we have a tremendous privilege to be able to be influential in our government. You have the privilege, you have the right to be able to run for office. And this does not exclude you or prevent a Christian from running for office. It doesn't prevent you from encouraging your neighbors to vote for the more godly individual. That's not what it's saying at all. What it is saying is that you and I as individuals are to be in submission to the governing authorities. Why? Because God put them there. Now again, does that excuse away abuse of power? Absolutely not. And God will be their judge. But we as an individual, as Christians, are to be in submission. You see, there's a general principle for you and I. We're to be in submission to all authority. And if God's put you in a position of authority, maybe at work or in a family or some other place, then you are to consider yourself that you're also a servant before God. You're not to abuse other individuals that are underneath you. It's not an excuse for anybody to abuse those. And of course, in our judicial system, we have the opportunities to make redress, to complain or bring to light the abuses of government. And that's perfectly fine. And Paul's not speaking against that. It's this hard attitude that says, I'm submitting to government because I'm submitting to Jesus Christ. Now, where does that end? Does that mean that we just, if the government outlaws church gatherings or Bible readings or things like that, that then we are to cease to continue to read our Bibles or gather as Christians? And obviously not. For in Acts chapter 4, we have this. Now, if you may recall, John and Peter had been arrested. They had been thrown in prison because they were saying with others, these miracles, there was a man who was healed, these miracles happened in the name of Jesus. And they told him very sternly no longer to talk in the name of Jesus. It tells us here in Acts chapter 4, verse 18, so they called them, that is the officials, the government officials, the same officials that we're told to be in submission to, they called them and commanded that they not speak at all nor teach in the name of Jesus. And here's the answer. But Peter and John answered and said to them, whether it is right in the sight of God to listen to you more than to God, you judge. For we cannot but speak the things which we have seen and heard. So the line is when they contradict what the Word of God says. We're told throughout the Scriptures that we are to share the gospel. We're to communicate with others the good news of Jesus Christ. If the law says something that's absolutely contrary to the Word of God, for example, in our modern political correctness, we're being pushed or told there's an agenda saying that various sexual sins need to be willingly embraced and celebrated. And it's perfectly fine for us as Christians to say, no, I don't celebrate that. I don't endorse that sinful lifestyle, whatever it might be, because the Scriptures don't endorse that. I submit to the office of whoever's in authority. I submit to the governmental officials, but when they come in contradiction to what God's Word says, then I follow God's Word. You see, our conscience before the Lord needs to be absolutely clean. Verse 3 here, Paul continues to explain this. For rulers are not a terror to good works, but to evil. Do you want to be unafraid of the authority? Do you want what is good? Then you will have praise of the same. So if you're living a godly lifestyle, if you're living a lifestyle that's honoring to others, then if you're living a lifestyle that's loving your neighbors the way Christ has loved you, then you have really nothing to fear. It's the idea, if you happen to be walking through the store somewhere and you happen to see a police officer in uniform, that you all of a sudden you don't get beads of sweat on you because, they might have seen me taking something. If you have a clear conscience before God and before man, you can go through the grocery store or whatever store you're at and not worry a bit about it. Of course, if you stuffed your pockets full of stuff as you went through the store, or if you ran into the store trying to escape from the police, then sure you ought to be afraid. And that's the idea here. Verse 4, for he is God's minister, that is, that governmental official is God's minister to you for good. But if you do evil, be afraid, for he does not bear the sword in vain, for he is God's minister and an avenger to execute wrath on him who practices evil. In our modern culture, we are being constantly bombarded with the idea that there is no evil in the world, and that is biblically inaccurate. There is evil in the world. One of the reasons for government is that evil would be punished. That's one of God's parameters for government, is for them to punish evil. We can clearly see the sword was an instrument of death. The Roman government, when they captured criminals, routinely beheaded them, executed them, the death penalty. The crucifixion that, of course, Jesus endured was only reserved for the worst of the criminals and those of low class. You see, in Jesus' case, because he challenged what the Pharisees had been doing and suggested that they go back to what the Word of God actually said, the Pharisees were so upset and so determined to get him out of their lives that they had him killed, but killed in the most gruesome way possible, in the lowest or most disrespectful way possible, unaware that they were fulfilling exactly what God's Word had said. You may recall from Psalm 22, if you have a moment, you can read through Psalm 22 in light of the crucifixion of Christ, and you'll understand that it is a prophetic psalm speaking about the death of Christ. It's not the only place. There's multiple places. So government is for the purpose of keeping in check evil. And when government fails to keep in check evil, then evil becomes more persuasive. There is evil in this world. Because there is evil in this world, and because of God's great love for us, he sent his only begotten Son to come into the world, that you and I might be set free from evil, from sin. You see, if government does not do its function the way God designed it to do it, then man's sinfulness will go unchecked. And we see examples of that throughout the world. We see examples of that on the news on a routine basis. The quote-unquote no-go zones where police officers or governmental officials have allowed another group to take over an area and to do whatever they think is right. Then evil persists or exists. And it's not that there's not evil in other places, but then evil gets away with stuff. And unfortunately, they think that they get away with it forever. But they're not going to, because God is going to judge them. So government is there for purpose. Government is there to keep you afraid. If you're prone to kill people, the fear of getting caught and being executed is a good fear. Having worked previously in the prison system, having run across a number of different guys in different places, one of the things that guys from other states would say, from New Mexico or from Louisiana would say, don't get caught in Texas. Because in Texas, they're serious about it. They'll really put you to death. You see, California, where I grew up, has a death penalty, but they haven't executed anybody since they reinstituted the death penalty. And so as a deterrent, it's not very strong. But in Texas, we put people to death on a routine basis. Now, is it a solution to all crime? Certainly not. Certainly not. And is there a proper place for us to verify that the individual is really guilty of the crime? Absolutely. But the idea of the government, now you individually, I individually, in Romans chapter 12, it tells us not to take vengeance. But let that vengeance give God room to execute that wrath or that vengeance. And as we give God room, what's the instrument he uses primarily? The governmental authorities. You see, on a personal basis, I'm not to seek revenge. But I certainly can appeal to the government, in our case, the judicial system, and seek for not revenge, but consequences for the action. And for a family that maybe has suffered something, or an individual that has suffered some tremendous, horrific, sinful activity, maybe that somebody in your family was killed, or somebody was really ripped off, or somebody was beaten up or abused, just sending somebody to prison or just sending them to the death chamber doesn't resolve the issue, does it? They need to be able to experience the love and the grace and the forgiveness of Jesus Christ themselves. In the healing, even as a victim, the healing that only comes through Jesus Christ. So it's not the solution for each individual. The solution for the individual is to come to Christ and to embrace his forgiveness and his healing. But it is government's position to be able to bring about consequences for evil action. And so again, government is there as a check against evil. Mankind's heart is wicked and deceitful. And without checks, we would just run rampant in our evil. And again, you see cases of that throughout history. And so we need to be very careful with that. Verse 5, therefore you must be subject not only of wrath, or because of wrath, in other words, not just the fear of wrath, but also for conscience sake. Again, if you're walking through the grocery store and you happen to see a police officer, if you're guilty of something, you're naturally going to be nervous and afraid. But if you haven't done anything, then the police officer being in the same store with you is not a nerve-wracking experience. All of us, I think, have had the experience at one time or another when a police officer pulls up behind you. And we always double check our speed. Am I doing things right? Is there something wrong? Do I have my seatbelt on? And all those sorts of things. But if you're doing everything right, you might still be a little bit nervous, but you can sort of cruise along without any great fear. But if you just ran the stop sign 2 minutes ago, you know that light that was, you saw it from a distance as green. By the time you got close to it, it was yellow. And before you even got to the line, it was red, and you know that you're guilty. And then you see the police car pull in behind you. You know that you're guilty. Not that that's ever happened to me, of course. But you get the idea that the guilt comes on because you know that you did something wrong. And that's how we ought to respond. It's a healthy thing. It's a right thing. Therefore, verse 5 again, therefore you must be subject not only because of wrath, but also for conscience sake. To have a clean, clear conscience before the Lord, that I'm living right before God. Verse 6, for because of this you also, and I know none of you are going to like this, because of this, because we're living in submission to the governmental authorities, because we're living with a clean conscience, we also pay taxes. Wait a minute. Wasn't America built against taxation? Didn't a bunch of our forefathers throw tea into the Boston Harbor to rebel against taxation? And yes, they did. But when we pay our taxes, by paying them, we are submitting ourselves to governmental authorities. Now, if the government gives you, we sometimes call them loopholes, but if they give you exceptions for different things, it's perfectly fine and legitimate for you to take advantage of every exception or exemption that they would allow you. You just can't claim your pet hamster as your dependence or something else like that. But if you give to the church, and as long as they give you that option to not tax that portion of it, if you have large medical bills or you have business expenses and they say you don't have to pay taxes on that, wonderful, that's fine. That's great. That's all following the law. To cheat or to make up things along the way is not. But we're called to pay our taxes. We're to pay our taxes for they are God's ministers, attending continually to this very thing. That's the purpose. Now, when a governmental authority abuses the power of taxation, if they take money for their own personal gain, are we fair? Is it right for us to be upset with that and seek redress? Absolutely. It's okay for us to hold the government accountable and say, okay, wait a minute, why did you pay $3,000 for this hammer? It's okay for us to ask those kinds of questions. And in our form of government, we have the tremendous privilege of being able to interact with that. That it's not just a ruling class. Our form of government is unique in the world. Not every other individual. If you go to other parts of the world, they have no ability to legitimately file a complaint against the government. We do. Does it always work out the way we want it to? Certainly not. But at least we do have that option. But we are to pay our taxes. But then again, it's not an excuse for governmental authorities to misuse or use those funds for themselves or for their own personal gain. Verse 7, render therefore to all their due, taxes to whom taxes are due, customs to whom customs are due. And of course, we don't usually deal with customs, but that's the idea when you import or bring something in and there's a taxation upon that. And then fear to whom fear, and honor to whom honor. Who are we fundamentally to honor? We're to honor the Lord with our whole lives. That's who we're to honor. Matter of fact, Jesus was asked this very sort of question. He said, hey, should we really pay taxes? They asked him that question. Should we really pay taxes? And you may recall this story, but he said, well, bring me a coin. So they brought him a coin, and he said to them, okay, whose image is on this coin? And they said, Caesar's. And then Jesus said this, render therefore to Caesar the things that are Caesar's, and to God the things that are God's. Money, although it's used for us to live, to buy our food, to pay our bills, but money is something, it's just a tool. We are to live our whole lives before the Lord. We're to honor the Lord. We're to live lives that are upright or honoring to Him. We're to live lives that are reflecting of His glory, His honor. That's who we're to live for. So first and foremost, we're submitting to God. If God says something's wrong that you like, it doesn't say strawberry ice cream is wrong, but if it did, just as a bad example, but if God said strawberry ice cream is wrong, don't eat it, then guess what? You and I as Christians, as Bible-believing Christians would say, okay, I don't eat strawberry ice cream. Why? Well, because the Bible says it. That would be the end of it. Now, of course, the Bible doesn't tell us not to eat strawberry ice cream. So you're welcome to eat strawberry ice cream this afternoon if you want to. But we're to render to God our whole lives. What we do in our private, in our homes, our life is to be glorifying to God. What we do at work, our life is to be glorifying to God. What we do in public is to be glorifying to God. Even the way that we might protest or the way that we might seek correction in our government needs to be done in a way that brings honor to the Lord. Again, it's not saying that we can't protest or we can't submit to the government our objection to things. And again, in our form of government, we have great privileges that many other nations don't have. But even when we do that, we need to do it in a way that's honoring to the Lord. So we're to render to those that collect taxes. We're to render to those that collect customs. Render those who work in the midst of fear, in other words, respect, that fear of punishment. And then honor to who honor is due, to give that to God. Now in the next section, the next half of this chapter, verses 8 through 14, are speaking about our relationship with our neighbors. How are we to deal with one another? In light of all that God has done, how are we to live with one another? Verse 8 goes on to say this, owe no one anything except love one another. For he who loves another has fulfilled the law. Do you understand that if you were just to live your life to love other people, You don't need to worry about what the rules and regulations are in the Old Testament or what the rules and regulations are if you were just simply to be motivated by love for one another. Now, it doesn't say just love other Christians, and it doesn't say, well, just love those who are the fan of the same football team I'm a fan of, or only love those that live in Garland or those that live in Texas, but it says to love one another with the love of Christ. We're called to do that, to love one another. We're not to owe a debt. It doesn't imply or mean that we can't borrow. That's not the idea. But that if you borrowed something or you took out a loan for a house or something else like that, then you're obligated to pay back that loan. But at some point, hopefully you're still alive, at some point you'll be done paying off that debt and that house would be completely yours. You'll be debt-free. And it's a principle that a Christian ought to work towards, is to be debt-free. But this debt of love never ends. You can't say, well, like some of the disciples did, well, how many times am I supposed to forgive somebody? 49? 7 times? 49 times? I can't get the math right. But anyways, you get the idea. Is there a limitation of how much I'm supposed to love somebody? If they keep coming back, or if they keep offending me, am I to keep loving them in the love of Christ? Absolutely you are. Does that mean that we get to be sort of abused by other individuals? No, it's not an excuse for abuse, but that heart of love that says, I still love you, although you might, under the government, suffer consequences for your action, but I can still have this love. So again, back in Matthew chapter 5, Jesus didn't say that you can't borrow. He said, give to him who asks, and from him who wants to borrow, do not turn him away. So the idea is that you can lend or borrow stuff to other people. But in Proverbs 22, it gives us a cautionary note. The rich rules over the poor, and the borrower is a servant to the lender. How many times have you said to yourself, well, I've got to go to work because I got to pay this bill, because I've got to pay the mortgage on the house. And you, in that sense, are a servant, a slave to whoever you owe money to. And the whole general principle is to not to owe money or to minimize the money that you do owe, to be wise stewards, not to incur unnecessary debt, but understanding that if you incur that debt that you're obligated to repay it. But with this thing of love, it's quite the opposite. We're called to love. There's no end to the amount of love. Now, in fulfilling the law, it goes on here in verse 9, it lists us some of the commandments that if we were to love one another the way Christ has loved us, we would automatically be fulfilling them. Verse 9, for the commandments, you shall not commit adultery. Adultery is to have sexual relations with somebody that's not your wife, another person that's married. And if you really love your neighbor as Christ has loved the church, you're not going to commit adultery. You're not going to be disloyal or unfaithful to your spouse, and you're not going to cause another spouse to be disloyal or unfaithful to them. That's not love. That's lust, but it's not love. You shall not commit murder. If we genuinely love others the way Christ calls us to love them, then we're not going to kill one another. Now notice, especially these two, Jesus elevated the commandments, didn't he? He said it's not just not to commit adultery, and it's not just not to commit murder, but it's not even to have those attitudes in your heart. To have lust. If you lust after a woman, he specifically said, then you've committed adultery. To have hatred in your heart, then you've committed murder. But if we have the love of Christ, I'm not saying that people don't tempt you or people don't irritate you, but if I respond to that in the love of Christ, I can overlook what might cause me to begin to have hatred, which of course leads to murder. He goes on to say, you shall not steal. If I really love my neighbor, I'm not going to take his stuff. If I really love my neighbor, I'm not going to take somebody's stuff. And somebody might say, but I don't know who this person is, so they're not my neighbor. And therefore I got an excuse, I can take their stuff. And no, that's not the case at all. My neighbor is what? Is anybody. Remember, you might remember Jesus was asked, well, who's my neighbor? Kind of religious leaders looking for loopholes. And that's when Jesus told us the story of the Good Samaritan. Remember the story of the Good Samaritan? A man was traveling and he got beat up along the way by a group of robbers. And then religious individuals came along. People who were good people, at least according to the culture, and they just walked on the other side of the road. They ignored the problem. But the Samaritan, which, by the way, the Samaritan was the half-breeds, the hated people, those that they had strong racial and religious prejudices against. But he stopped and tended to this man's needs. He went out of his way to provide for him. And Jesus said at the end of his story, the Samaritan was the one who was a good neighbor. They didn't know who he was, but he performed that function as a good neighbor. So just because you don't know somebody doesn't exclude you from not being a good neighbor to them or loving them. So you shall not steal. And of course, stealing starts in the heart. And we'll get to the coveting thing in a minute. But you shall not bear false witness. That a lie. You shall not, when somebody takes something, you don't say, well, no, the green person took it instead of the blue person, or whatever else it might be. And then he goes on to say, you shall not covet. And the more you look at this word covet, it's the idea of longing, desiring something that somebody else has. It's not just saying, oh yeah, you have a nice car, that's nice. But it's literally the idea that your life is motivated to get something that somebody else has. And if you can't have what they want, then you want to destroy what they do have. Which is all a heart issue. And we're not to be that way. If your neighbor has something nice, you can say, well, hey, you got a nice widget. That's great. And I'm content before the Lord what I have. I've got a car with 3 wheels, but I'm okay because God's provided me with 2 feet. And although you have a really nice car, whatever else it might be. But we're not to be people that are motivated by covetousness. But we live in a culture that is driven by covetousness. Our advertising is always saying to you, whatever you have, it's not good enough. You need something more. They're selling you that every week. If you can't go in the grocery store, you can't drive by the road, you can't watch any sort of program without somebody somewhere saying, whatever you have, it's not good enough. You need a new one. You need a blue one instead of the red one, or whatever else. And so we have to understand that's the culture that we live in, and we need to be on guard against that. So you shall not covet, and if there is any other commandment, all are summed up in this saying, namely, you shall love your neighbor as yourself. So you don't need to worry about the list of, say, the 10 commandments and knowing which one is what. Your commandment is to love your neighbor just like you would love yourself. In other words, treat others like you would want to be treated. Love does no harm to a neighbor, therefore love is the fulfillment of the law. How do we fulfill what God instructs us to do? First of all, by coming in contact with God, experiencing and understanding the love of God. I've already mentioned this a little bit to you, but Jesus displayed or demonstrated his great love for us. As Almighty God, he came down here on earth, and he paid the penalty for each of our sins. Why? Because you were the greatest person alive? No, because of his tremendous love for you, and he knew that you were messed up. You were drowning. You were covered in scum or whatever gross thing you want to think of. And he took you and he's cleaning you up so that you could be used for his glory. He wants to clean you up. He wants to transform you. And then he wants others to say, look what God can do. Look what God can do. And that's what your life and my life is supposed to be about, is us letting others see our lives and say, how in the world can you love that person? And it's because Christ has loved me. If you have experienced the love of Christ, then you have the capacity to love the unlovable. You have the capacity to love that person at work that is just really irritating to you. Now, it might take lots of prayer. It might take a work of the Holy Spirit to fill your heart with his love for this individual, but you can love them. Not because you have the capacity in and of your own effort, but because you have a holy God living in you who's a God of love. And then you can love that unlovable person with the love of Christ. Loving that unlovable person does not excuse away their sin, but is now no longer motivated by a competition or wanting to get rid of somebody, but instead it's motivated by the love of God, that they would experience that great love and then be transformed by that love. So for us as Christians, it's quite simple. Love others like Christ has loved us. In light of that, he continues on here in verse 11, and do this knowing the time that now is high time to awake out of sleep. For now our salvation is nearer than when we first believed. In context, Paul is writing relatively shortly after the death, resurrection, and ascension of Jesus Christ. But it's still true today. The day is nearer than it's ever been for Christ's soon return. Now, some of you might say, or maybe you've had others say to you, but that's been over 2,000 years and Christ hasn't come back yet. And that's true. But we need to be living our lives with this urgent expectation that he is coming back soon. And he uses the analogy of being asleep, that we wouldn't be sleepwalking, that we wouldn't just sort of going through the motions, but instead that we would be alive and alert to what's going on in the world around us. That we would be walking rightly before God, not just sort of going through the motions. You see a person, some of you do this, whether you realize it or not, but when you're sleeping, anybody here ever talk in your sleep? Or have somebody else tell you that you talk in your sleep? We can hear in our sleep. You're able to wake somebody else up when they're asleep. How about this? Sleepwalking. Anybody ever been guilty of that? I found this one kind of interesting. Singing in their sleep. That's kind of an interesting one. We certainly can think our dreams in a sleep. So just going through motions is not enough, but we need to be alive, alert, attentive to what's going on. And we need to put on Christ. It's this analogy, the phrasing there is the idea of getting dressed. Thank God that each and every one of you got dressed this morning. And that is our dress standard here at church. Get dressed. Just come on with some clothes on, okay? But you came intentionally, whether you spent 30 seconds thinking about it or 30 minutes thinking about it, you put some sort of clothes on. When you show up for work, you put clothes on, and you put specific clothes on. If you're going to go work in the yard this afternoon, you might put on a different set of clothes. But the idea is that you intentionally put them on for a purpose. And that's the idea, is that we're to put off all the junk from our past, all the things that we used to do, and instead we're to put on Christ. But it's a conscious effort. It's this illustration of putting away my old way of thinking, and I'm putting on the appropriateness. I'm putting on Jesus Christ for today. I'm casting off my sinful behavior from the past. I'm casting off my old way of thinking, and instead I'm being renewed by the Word of God. And I'm putting on Christ. And as we put on Christ, he goes on to say this, for the night is far spent, in verse 12, the day is at hand, therefore let us cast off, same sort of illustrative word, to put aside, to cast off works of darkness, and let us put on the armor of light. So it's the same idea. Maybe you've been working outside, maybe this afternoon after being working outside and your clothes are all sweaty and you take them off intentionally, and hopefully you don't put them right back in the closet or in the dresser, right? You put them off to be washed. But then you'd put on Christ. It's the same idea, the same analogy, that we would put off our works of darkness, but put on Christ. And we put on the armor of God. You see, it's not your ability to fight against temptation, to fight against evil in this world, but you put on Christ. Christ is the one that fights, not you. You're an active participant, but it's Christ that's doing the work. Now, he gives us a list of things. Let us walk properly, or correctly would be another way to put that, as in the day. Not in rivalries and drunkenness, not in lewdness and lust, not in strife and envy. Now, some of those words are words that we may not be familiar with. At least it's not words that we always use in our common everyday language. Rivalry is really partying. It's the idea of having a party for the sake of being loud and obnoxious, for the sake of anything goes at the party. Usually it includes alcohol or some other sort of substance to lower your inhibitions so that you can just have at it however you want to. That's what rivalry is. Over in 1 Peter chapter 4, it tells us this, for we have spent enough of our past lifetime in doing the will of the Gentiles. That would be the ungodly or the unregenerate, when we walked in lewdness, lust, drunkenness, rivalry, drinking parties, and abominable idolatries. You see, we're not to be participating in those things any longer. Now, when I say party, it doesn't mean that we can't celebrate. It that we can't be enthusiastically happy about an event, an anniversary, a birthday, a wedding, or something else like that. But again, when you know the vernacular in our even our phrase today, we say, hey, we're going to go party. What we usually mean is we're not celebrating somebody's birthday. We're going to go get drunk. We're going to go inebriated, and we're just going to sort of let our hair down, is what we might say. And that's not what we're to be about. And then he goes on to say in drunkenness. The word drunkenness is specifically consuming quantities of alcohol, and we could substitute substance abuse, to the point of becoming impaired. Our faculties being impaired. Usually it includes somebody who becomes sleepy, drowsy, vomiting, hallucinating, so forth. And the scripture gives us a long list of stuff. In Job 12 and Psalm 107, it talks about staggering because of somebody who's drinking. Being wounded or beat. And people have gotten beat up because they were drunk. In Proverbs chapter 20 and 23. Vomiting. The scripture speaks about that as well in Isaiah 19 and Jeremiah 25. That one of the side effects, again, of drinking is vomiting. Hallucinations, Isaiah 28, Proverbs 23. The mental effects of alcohol is mentioned throughout the scriptures because it gives us a false sense of our abilities to do things. And here's the most important thing. It deadens our spiritual awareness of the presence of God in our lives. If we are allowing alcohol or other things to control our lives, it's deadening our spiritual awareness of what's going on around us. That's why the guy or the gal who's in bondage to alcohol or substance abuse, oftentimes spiritual things come right along with that, where it degrades them because they've deadened their senses. And Satan loves to get us hooked on anything like that, to deaden our senses, so that we would not be aware of the spiritual battles that are going on around us. So we need to be sober-minded, is another word that's said. Licentiousness is another word that's in this list, and it's a desire for a forbidden bed. It's that desire or lustful desire. It goes along with the idea of adultery or fornication, but it describes a person who has no sets of values for sexual purity or fidelity. That's licentiousness. And it may not even be a person who follows through with the acts, but it's the person that's always flirtatious. Doesn't matter who's around them, but they're willing to say anything or tell a dirty joke at any moment. And then it goes on with the word lust. And it's the idea of not only lust in the sense of a sexual desire, but it's really even more than that. It's somebody who no longer cares what people consider what they do. In other words, they flaunt it. They flaunt their stealing. They flaunt their car, their gold chains. They flaunt their licentious lifestyle. They flaunt it without any shame, without any guilt. And that is part of a mind, a heart that's been clouded because they are not putting on Christ. You and I are to put off those things. Notice again in context here, we're to no longer be doing those things. We're to put those things off. Instead, we're to walk properly as in the day, not doing this rivalry or partying, not in drunkenness or in control of other substances, not in lewdness or in lust, not in strife or in envy, but instead, verse 14, put on the Lord Jesus Christ. And then I love this last phrase, make no provisions for the flesh to fulfill its lust. You see, brothers and sisters, we are in a battle. Whether we like it or not, whether we recognize it or not, we're in a battle. We live in a world around us that is diametrically opposed to Jesus Christ. So you can't walk into the grocery store without putting on your armor of God and putting on Jesus Christ, because you're going to be tempted in a host of ways. You can't go to work without putting on the armor of God or putting on Jesus Christ, because there are people at work who will entice you into all kinds of thinking that is unbiblical. So we are in a battle. Now, the flesh is still active. We have the world around us, and then we've got our own flesh that we carry with us wherever we go. And we could liken the flesh as like a lump of decaying hamburger, and how easily it makes the other things it comes in contact with decaying. And the idea is that we're to get as far away as possible from that. And then we also have Satan himself who battles against us. So it sounds like we're in a losing battle. We've got the world around us. We've got my own fleshly nature, plus Satan's out there tempting me. Who could possibly win? The good news is found in Jesus Christ, though, right? So although the flesh is active, the flesh is something that we have to deal with. We have to work in the process of walking properly before God. But it's not in our own abilities. It's not because, okay, I'm just going to hold my breath long enough. Or I'm just going to resist this temptation, whatever it might be, long enough. No, that's not the principle. The principle is to put on Christ. Christ, would you empower me to overcome whatever it is that so easily entangles me? Maybe it's a sexual sin. Maybe it's a substance abuse. Maybe it's anger. Maybe it's unforgiveness, that you just keep falling down into the same rut. What does God say to you? You need to put it off. Okay, I understand that. I get that I need to stop drinking. I need to stop looking at pornography. I need to change my heart of bitterness. But how do I do that? And remember, if you remember back from a couple of months ago, the right question is not how, but who. I need to put on Christ. I need Christ to so fill my heart. I need to have Christ overwhelming me, that I'm no longer controlled by these various desires. And instead, I have Christ in me, the hope of glory. You see, it's God that works through us and in us that we might live a lifestyle that's honoring to Him. It's God that works in us that enables us to be in submission to governmental authorities even when we think they're wrong. It's Christ working in us that allows us to work wholeheartedly for our boss or supervisor, even though we're sure that they're the worst boss possible. And I'm not giving excuses for bosses or governmental authorities, but I'm saying our hearts need to be such that we're living wholeheartedly for Jesus Christ, irregardless of those around us. And by the way, when you honor your boss, who may be a heathen, an idiot, or whatever other vernacular other people say about them, that you would be respectful to them because you're being respectful to God. And when you disagree with the government, that you disagree with it in a respectful way, in a way that's honoring to the Lord. And that fundamentally that we would love one another, we would love our neighbor. And it is never enough. How much do we need to love our neighbor? More. Well, I've loved them this much. More. It is an unending debt to love them. Why? Because you have experienced the love of Christ. Because Christ has so filled your heart with His love that then you're able to love that boss, that governmental authority, your neighbor, your coworker, not because they deserve it, but in spite of their actions, you're able to love them. And if you find yourself having difficulty to love them with the love of Christ, guess what you need? You need to put on more of Christ in your life. You need more of Jesus, which is what I've been saying about the book of Romans, is it's all about Jesus. No matter where you're at, you need more of Jesus. You've been walking with the Lord for all of your life, you still need more of Jesus. If you just barely begun your walk with God, God still says you need more of Jesus. And if you haven't started your walk with God, you need to come to know Jesus and have Him empower you to be able to put off all the junk of this world, the junk of our own flesh, and to put on Christ. Is it going to be a battle? Absolutely. Is it going to be a battle every day? Pretty much. But the victory belongs to Christ. It's not your ability to resist. It's not your ability to sort of conjure up love for the unlovable. It's literally God giving you a brand new heart that says that thing that I used to be attracted to, I'm no longer attracted to. And that individual that I think is a bad individual that I don't want to hang out with, God has given me a heart of love for them. And then again, making no provision for the flesh. Sometimes it's simple stuff. If the internet causes you to trip up and be tempted, get rid of the internet. If Facebook consumes all of your time, get rid of Facebook. If the car consumes all of your time, then get rid of the car. Those things that cause you to easily stumble, don't make provision for them. You know, if somebody struggles with alcohol, just as an example, you wouldn't say to them, well, go get a Diet Coke down at the liquor store, would you? Be foolish, wouldn't it? It's like, wait a minute, you struggle with alcohol. Why in the world would I send you to the liquor store? So we need to be careful with those sorts of things and set up boundaries for ourselves. And all of us struggle with different things. One guy, it might be alcohol. Somebody else, it may be unforgiveness and hatred. Before the Lord, they're both equal sins. And we need to ask the Lord to transform us and change us.